You got music.
Oh God, yeah,
sorry.
to get rid of the music for you. You're on.
Right, thank you.
Go for it.
Right, we'll get started. So, for those of you that I don't know yet, my name's Jenny. I've been here for just over 10 years, working across A-levels, GCSE and HE. So the topic of exam prep is one that certainly I've got a lot to say about. Positivity maybe less. But one of the sort of focuses for today, and that's whether or not your students have already sat exams, whether they're just about to, or indeed, hopefully this might be some tips for next year as well. But generally, there are 4 things I wanted to sort of focus on. So, the build-up, that I've clearly not taken all of the slides off, and staff behaviours, student behaviours, and then on the day itself. So, generally, sort of the build-up. When kind of Dave asked me to do this, I asked my students specifically what helps them at this time of the year and what do they find as a massive hindrance to sort of their attitudes going into the exams, which will start next week. And really the thing that they had said is that for some of them it felt like the exam crept up on them. So they were saying, like, mentioning the exam as much as possible throughout the year, talking constantly about mark schemes, assessment objectives, and generally making that part of the vocabulary of every single conversation, of every single lesson. So even if it isn't that you're focusing on a particular skill or a particular question for an exam or an approach, but kind of saying, can you find the links, the connections between these things? One of the things that has really helped my students this year is giving as much information about the marking process as possible. So when they're getting all sort of het up about doing the exam, I sort of remind them that they're worth £7.34 per paper to an examiner. That's it. And they're not going to spend the time sort of working out what you were trying to say, what you were hoping to say, all of the knowledge that you built up for the 2 years. They're not quite as interested or invested as we are. And ultimately, that seems to calm them down a bit because they're not trying to impress us. They're not trying to meet our expectations, which are incredibly high. They're trying to meet the expectations of a stranger. And ultimately, they can't know who that is. So consistency, rather than sort of extreme evidence of their knowledge, is much more important to them in that exam period. And that's really what we try to emphasise. I think as well, giving the students agency is a really big important part of the build-up to the exams. Getting them to be realistic about what they're aiming for. And that doesn't need to be sort of a reality check for students or bringing them down sort of back to ground. It can just be, look, what would you be happy with on results day? What would you be ecstatic about? And what would you be disappointed with? And sort of having them at those boundaries so that you can work realistically within the parameters. I also share grade boundaries from previous years, more specifically 23-2019, but then I make the students do some maths. My students are English students, this terrifies them, but ultimately gives them agency. And I've pre-done the maths so you don't have to. But what we often do, we have coursework, which kind of is a contributor to their overall grade, 20%. So I ask them realistically to think about what grade they'd like at the end of the year, what would they be happy with. And we start there, and we reduce the coursework grade that they've already got from it, and then we divide the rest by the papers that they've got. 2 papers, so potentially for a student going for a B, they need to get 60.5 marks out of 100 per paper. 3 questions per paper. Averaging around 21 marks per question. That is less terrifying to a student when they hear they've got to average 21 marks out of 40 than if you say you've got to try and get a B on that question. It just gives them a real sense of like that's achievable. The other thing is that my grade boundaries are high all year. Around, as you can sort of see, about 7% higher than the exam boards. I would much rather them be surprised positively than negatively. So when I say that, and I say, well, actually 60.5 marks per paper is just a C in my mark scheme. For them, it's a B. So they're already going in, well, I'm kind of already achieving that, so I don't need to go and do anything different than what I'm doing at the moment. And actually that might be a different question or a different set of circumstances for another student who realises that they might need to work a bit harder to achieve it, and then the support comes in that way. For some students that are kind of wanting that A star, when they realise that I've been getting them to fight for a 90% all year, and they can actually get away with an 83, it takes some of that pressure off of them. Not to become complacent, but certainly to be a little bit nicer to themselves at this time of year. And that's potentially one of the things I'm just going to mention here. I'll come back to staff, we'll go to students first. You've probably seen these behaviours. Avoidance, attendance potentially, and also just pretending that the work that you're setting them doesn't exist. Might be another one. On the other end of the spectrum, we've also had overcommitment. Went into the A-levels, as I said yesterday, student was asleep on the desk at, 8 in the morning, because they were allowing themselves 5 hours of sleep and the rest was for revision. Okay, and that's a pressure that they put on themselves because they're not feeling prepared, supported, potentially at home, but maybe at college as well. And all of these, the avoidance and the overcommitment, are just signs of that anxiety. So if you're not aware yet, the exam drop-ins are happening with safeguarding. They can email them, they can just drop into F116, but the support is there for kind of both of those behaviours. But that kind of takes me back to the staff. We were just having a conversation there, Chloe, about your students were kind of writing some wrong things in exam prep yesterday. Wrong things. Just utterly wrong. In the exam text. Tuesday. Right. So one of the things we talk about is that you can't go in hard with students there. You can't say, why don't you know this? Like, this is a massive problem, you need to sort this out. That's what you want to say. What you have to say is, maybe you want to consider this approach, or would this example be better placed where you've got this here? The positive interactions, really, students don't need to feel berated at this time of the year. Okay, it's purposeful time as well. I sit in the A-level staff room watching staff leave constantly to give one-to-ones to students that are like, I'm so stressed, I can't do this. Can you sit with me for an hour and go over this question? Is that purposeful? For some students, maybe. For others, they want you to reteach sessions that you've already done. Is there sort of giving them more agency and taking them and saying, look, you're saying you're struggling with that, go away and do a past paper question and come back to me when there's something physical that we can discuss. Me reteaching you the spec in an hour is not going to be useful. The same with revision sessions. Are the students just kind of passively staring at you as you repeat the same information that you've said thousands of times before? Or is there something more purposeful we can do with our time? And I think anxiety as well. This is the biggest thing that my students said to me, is that we're feeling stressed because we know our teachers are stressed. They might not be a sponge for the things we're trying to teach them, but they certainly are for the emotions that we are kind of bringing into lesson. So one of the students kind of said, look, I'm being set 5 pieces of homework every Friday from one subject. I've been told that this is the only subject that matters. I need to forget all of the other ones. And ultimately, the conversation needs to be, well, ignore that. You know what you need to do. You know what is the priority. And ultimately, their anxiety does not need to be your anxiety. And I think we all feel it at this time of year. We're all worried about the results in August coming through. Are they going to be reflective of the effort we've put in that the students deserve? But we've got a point to sort of let go of that. They are their results. Ones that we can be proud of and ones that we might want to sort of improve upon in the future. But there has to be a point where our anxiety stops. Okay, otherwise we're going to spend the summer miserable and nobody wants that. So day. Really, again, it comes in with these behaviours that we want to see reflected in the students. Be at the meeting point early. I'm generally early by nature anyway. Exam days, I'm sort of outside I block, pacing for about an hour before they're due to get there. That's probably a bit excessive, you can calm that down. But being there, knowing sort of having your registers already, knowing which students you're expecting. Don't quiz the students with last minute questions, even if they come up to you. Can I just check this? If this kind of question comes up, what do I say? How should I write this? What do I respond here? Again, no kind of just shouting them in, saying just make sure that you include this. Okay. It all kind of increases that anxiety. I've done it before with use acronyms in Langlet. I say to my students, don't forget your gherkins and pickles as they run right through. That means something to them, but I'm not doing them any favours at all. And it's the try to be calm and supportive. They don't need our stress, our sort of anxiety, and they certainly don't need us to be projecting that idea of fear as they go in. So one of the things that I do prior to the exam is I give my students a little like good luck charm, 49p, that's it. And it means that when they wear it in the exam, and if they're ever kind of feeling a bit stressed, it's a question they didn't like, I always kind of say to them, right, you've got something on your wrist, that's me in the exam. Take 30 seconds and go, what would Jenny say about this question? What would she want me to include? It just anchors them back down from that sort of sense of panic. Okay, so that's not for everybody, and it might be going, oh, that's a bit, good gosh, that's a bit cheesy. But for my students, it definitely works. So I know that's been a whistle-stop tour. I don't want to stop you from going to your lessons, despite the free reign we've got today. But if you have any questions, please let me know. And thank you very much.
Thank you.